My name is RAELYN, and I'm 29 years old. I never thought I'd return to my childhood home, only to be treated like I never existed. I rang the doorbell. I could hear laughter inside, dishes clinking, a celebration. When the door finally opened, my brother Jaden stood there. He didn't smile. "What are you doing here?" I hesitated. "I heard Grandma passed. I came to say goodbye." He looked me up and down. "This is a family matter," he said, then closed the door. I stood there on the porch, alone, but strangely at peace. "Then I guess I'm no longer family," I whispered, and walked away. Before I go on, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment, tap that like button, and subscribe if stories about family betrayal and quiet revenge speak to your soul. I wasn't always a stranger to my own blood. There was a time when I still tried to belong, when I still believed that if I worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, and stayed quiet long enough, maybe someone in that house would finally see me. I was 9 the first time I realized silence could be safer than speaking. It was a late afternoon in spring. The kitchen smelled like fried onions and floor cleaner. I stood on a step stool at the sink, scrubbing dishes that weren't mine. My fingers ached from the hot water. Behind me, the rice cooker beeped. I'd nearly forgotten it was even on. Outside, my younger brother Jaden was running through the yard, laughing like nothing in the world could touch him. He had a soccer ball tucked under one arm, and the dog chased him like they were best friends. I remember looking up for a second, watching them through the window. I smiled. That moment, brief and pure, felt like freedom. Then I heard her voice. "RAELYN, are you deaf?" I said, "Bring the laundry in." It was my mother, Diana Hayes. She didn't come to the kitchen. She never did. She barked orders from wherever she was, usually the couch. I wiped my hands on a towel, hurried to the backyard, and started gathering the stiff, wind-dried sheets from the clothesline. The sun was setting, and the shadows stretched long and sharp across the yard. When I came back in, arms full, she didn't even look up. "Took you long enough. No wonder you'll never be like your brother." That was her favorite line. I heard it more than my own name. Jaden was the golden child, born with dimples and charm. He could break a lamp and be handed ice cream afterward. I could ace a test and be asked why the laundry wasn't folded. My father wasn't any better. Gregory Hayes believed discipline was love, and the belt was truth. There was a day he came home, furious that Jaden's shirt had a stain on it. No one asked who made the mess. It didn't matter. I was the oldest, the girl, the invisible one. I remember the sound the leather made as he pulled it from the loop of his pants, that long pause between the first shout and the first strike. I didn't cry, not right away. I stared at the wallpaper and tried to count the pattern, like if I could just stay outside my body, the pain wouldn't feel real. And when it was over, when I lay curled on the thin mattress in my room, I didn't pray for things to change. I prayed to become smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. But not everyone in that house saw me as a ghost. My grandmother Mamie lived with us for a short time when I was in the 4th grade. She had silver hair she always kept braided, and hands that smelled like lavender and flour. One night, after another round of shouting, I climbed into bed and found something tucked beneath my pillow, a slice of toast with butter and cinnamon, still warm, and a tiny folded note that said, "You are not what they say." She didn't say anything the next morning. She just smiled at me from across the kitchen table and patted my hair. That was the only time in my childhood I remember feeling seen. I held on to that moment like a life raft. Years later, when people ask me how I made it out of that house with any softness left in me, I tell them the truth. Her name was Mamie. Mamie passed away when I was 10. No funeral, no framed photo on the mantel. Just a rushed explanation from my mother that old people die, followed by a weekend of silence so thick it choked me. I remember sneaking into the backyard the night after they took her away. I sat under the old oak tree, clutching the last note she had ever written me. It wasn't long, just 5 words, scribbled on the back of a grocery list. "You are more than this." At that age, I didn't know what more could look like, but I knew what this meant. And I knew I wanted out of it. The years that followed blurred together like a long hallway with no doors, same routines, same voices, same eyes that never looked at me long enough to see who I really was. My chores grew heavier. I learned to cook for 5, clean like a maid, and budget grocery bills better than most adults. At school, I stayed quiet, finished assignments early, and walked home with my head down. People always ask why I didn't tell anyone. A teacher, a counselor, a friend. But when neglect wears the face of normal, it's hard to convince anyone that you're drowning. I wasn't bruised in the ways that left marks. No one ever locked me in a basement or screamed in public. The wounds came in whispers and glances, in silence, in being left out of birthday photos or never asked what I wanted for dinner. You learn to survive in those cracks. You learn to smile just enough not to worry the neighbors. My brother, Jaden, flourished like a well-watered plant in the same soil that left me wilted. He was loud, confident, and endlessly praised. My parents attended every soccer game, clapped at every school play, posted every minor award on the fridge like it was a Pulitzer. I once brought home a district writing trophy. It sat on the kitchen counter for 2 days before disappearing. When I asked about it, my mother said, "Maybe next time try winning something useful." By 13, I had already learned how to disappear in a room full of people. I walked quietly, kept my eyes down, and made sure my emotions never showed on my face. But inside, I was starting to change. I began writing late at night, pages and pages, stories about girls who ran away and built their own homes in the forest, girls who got on trains and never came back, girls who fought with fire in their bellies and never said sorry for taking up space. I hid the notebooks beneath the mattress. They weren't just stories, they were blueprints. Evidence that somewhere inside the quiet shell, there was still a voice waiting to be heard. I used to imagine what Mamie would say if she could see me. I liked to think she'd smile and tell me I hadn't disappeared. Not really. That I was just waiting for the right moment to rise, and maybe she was right. Because even back then, even in that house, I never fully gave up. I was still watching, still learning, still storing every insult, every silence, every moment they told me I wasn't enough. Not for revenge, not yet, but for clarity, for proof. Because one day, I knew, I'd need to remember exactly how it felt to be unseen, so I'd never do the same to myself again. By the time I turned 17, I had already lived 1,000 lives in silence. I worked every weekend at a diner off Route 17, bussing tables, wiping down ketchup-stained booths, refilling coffee for truckers who tipped in crumpled bills. My shifts started at 6 and ended after dark, and I always walked home, rain or shine. No one ever offered to pick me up. No one asked how work was. But I didn't mind. Not really. The clatter of dishes and hum of strangers' conversations felt more like family than my own home ever had. That Sunday night, I got back just after 9 p.m., my sneakers soaked and my jacket clinging to me like a second skin. I was exhausted, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones and makes you forget your own name. I opened the front door, and there he was. Jaden. Now 16, he had traded in scraped knees for a permanent scowl and the kind of arrogance that comes from being told your whole life that you're special. He was sprawled across the couch, scrolling through his phone like the world owed him something. He barely looked up. "Hey, iron this for me," he said, tossing a wrinkled shirt across the coffee table. "I've got a date tonight." I stood there dripping, hungry, my back aching. Something in me cracked. I picked up the shirt slowly, folded it, and set it neatly back down. Then I looked at him. Not through him, not around him. I looked straight at my brother for the first time in years. "You can iron it yourself," I said. At first he laughed like I was making a joke. Then he saw I wasn't smiling. "What did you say?" I didn't repeat it. I didn't have to. He stormed off, muttering something about ungrateful bitches. I didn't care. That wasn't the moment that scared me. What scared me was what I felt inside. Nothing. No guilt, no fear, just stillness. It was quiet for a few minutes, and then I heard footsteps heavier than his. My stomach clenched. I knew that rhythm. I had known it since I was 5. Gregory. He stood in the doorway with the same look he always wore when discipline was about to be handed down. Stern jaw, eyes narrowed, hands clenched just tight enough to signal control. "I heard you raised your voice," he said. "I didn't," I replied. "I just said no." That was enough. The belt came next. The same one I'd seen hanging from the hallway hook for over a decade. It was a relic, a reminder, a warning. I didn't run, I didn't beg, I didn't flinch when it hit my back. I just lay there on the cold living room floor, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. I wasn't thinking about pain, I was thinking about Mamie, about her voice, about cinnamon toast and folded notes, about what it meant to choose your own name, your own story. That night, I didn't cry, because something else happened instead. I let go. Not of the pain, not of the shame. I let go of the belief that one day it would change, that one day they'd see me, love me, treat me like I mattered. That was the night I stopped trying to be part of a family that never wanted me in it. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I packed. Not in a rush, not in fear. Quietly, methodically, like someone who had already left long ago and was only now catching up. I folded 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, and my one good hoodie, the navy blue one with the broken zipper. I rolled socks into tight little fists and tucked them into the corners of my backpack. I slid my school notebooks into the front pocket, not because I planned to keep going, but because they were the only proof I had that I once cared about something. Then I reached for the small, spiral-bound journal I kept hidden behind the radiator. It wasn't a diary. I never wrote about crushes or dreams or favorite colors. That little notebook was my map, a record of what had been taken from me and a quiet catalog of how I had survived. Every page held something small. April 14th, didn't eat, again. June 1st, watched Mom hug Jaden for winning MVP. She didn't look at me when I walked in. September 9th, burn mark on my arm, covered it with my sleeve. But in between the pain, I'd also written what I still had. Still breathing. Didn't scream. Folded my own clothes and made them look perfect. It wasn't poetry. It was evidence. I slipped the journal into the side of my bag like it was something sacred. Because it was. I opened my bedroom door and crept down the hallway. The floorboards groaned like old men, tired of secrets. I paused outside each door. My parents. Jaden. All asleep in their own little worlds, completely unaware that something was ending. When I reached the front door, I turned back. Not for them, but for me. I wanted to remember the chipped paint on the walls, the broken baseboard no one ever fixed, the smell of overcooked rice drifting faintly from the kitchen. I wanted to seal in that memory and then bury it somewhere far away, where it couldn't follow me. The air outside was cold and sharp. It sliced into my lungs and made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I couldn't stay. I walked 5 blocks to the bus station. The streets were mostly empty except for the occasional car passing by, headlights sweeping across the sidewalk like searchlights. I kept my eyes forward, hands in pockets, one foot in front of the other. At the station, I bought a ticket with the tips I had saved, crumpled ones and 5s from strangers who never knew they were funding an escape. The clerk didn't ask questions. He just printed the ticket and slid it across the counter. I thanked him with a nod and sat down on the cold plastic bench to wait. And I breathed. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't bracing for a voice yelling my name or a door slamming behind me. I was still. I was free. People talk about leaving like it's some dramatic exit, like you storm out with a suitcase and a middle finger. But the truth is, sometimes walking away is quiet, almost invisible, like the final note of a song only you could hear. That night, I didn't run, I didn't cry, I didn't look back. Because the moment I stepped outside that house, I wasn't running from something, I was walking toward myself. The bus pulled into town just after 7 a.m. The sky was still gray, the kind of gray that makes everything feel suspended between night and day. My body ached and my mouth tasted like metal, but I stayed awake the whole ride. I couldn't let myself sleep, not until I was somewhere safe. TIA was the only person I could think of. We sat next to each other in freshman science and passed notes during labs. She had a laugh that could fill a room and a way of looking at people like she actually saw them. Not just their face or their clothes. She saw what was underneath. I never told her everything. But maybe I didn't have to. Her address was still scribbled in the back of one of my school notebooks. I hadn't seen her in over a year, but something in me whispered she'd open the door. And she did. It took her a few seconds to recognize me. I must have looked like a ghost. Hair matted, eyes hollow, clothes rumpled from the ride. But when she did, she didn't ask a single question. She just said, "Come in." Her mom was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes. Gloria. I remembered her vaguely from a birthday party years ago. Warm eyes, big voice. She always wore these big gold hoop earrings and smelled like cinnamon and shea butter. She looked at me for maybe 2 seconds, then wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked over. She opened her arms wide like I was hers, and I hadn't even realized how tightly I'd been holding myself until I collapsed into them. "Baby, you're home now," she whispered into my hair. That was the first time I cried in years, not the silent kind of crying I used to do under the covers, not the clenched, bitten lip kind I learned to perfect, This was ugly, loud, messy. The kind that shakes you from the inside out and leaves your ribs aching. And they let me. They didn't rush me. Didn't ask what happened. They just let me sit at the kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket, with pancakes and orange juice in front of me like I belonged there. That morning changed everything. Because love, real love, doesn't come with a lecture. It doesn't start with, "Why didn't you?" or "You should have." It starts with a plate of warm food and a quiet seat at the table. That night, I slept in Tia's room. She gave me the bed and she took the floor. I tried to protest, but she shut me down with a look. "It's your turn," she said simply. I laid there for hours, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in slow, steady circles. No shouting, no footsteps outside my door, no fear of what tomorrow might bring. Just stillness, just breath. And that old ache in my chest, the one I thought would never go away, began to loosen. I wasn't healed. Not yet. But for the first time in my life, I had a glimpse of what it might feel like to be safe. Living with Gloria and Tia wasn't just safer. It was quieter, kinder. But even kindness can feel unfamiliar when you've been surviving on fear for most of your life. For the first few weeks, I flinched every time someone raised their voice, even if it was just laughter. I kept expecting to be asked to leave. I waited for the other shoe to drop. Because that's how it always worked before. Love had strings. Safety had a timer. But Gloria didn't work like that. She didn't hover or press. She just gave me space. Every morning she'd leave a plate of eggs and toast on the counter and a little yellow post-it that said something simple like, "You've got this," or "Proud of you already." And slowly, I began to believe her. I got a part-time job at a breakfast place down the road. Early hours, long shifts. My feet ached every night, but I welcomed it. Physical exhaustion felt honest, like I was building something real. I also enrolled in night classes at the local community center, GED prep. The kind of classroom where everyone has a story and no one needs to pretend everything's okay. I liked that. It made me feel less alone. Most nights I'd come home tired but steady. I'd shower, eat whatever Gloria left for me on the stove, and then sit at the small desk Tia helped me set up in the corner of the room. That's where the journal came back. It had moved with me, hidden in the bottom of my bag like a fragile secret. But now it lived on the desk, open, breathing. At first I still wrote like I was hiding. Quiet bullet points, short lines. Worked 6 hours, tired but okay. Math test tomorrow, scared but showing up. Gloria hugged me today just because. I didn't know what to do with that. But over time my entries grew longer, messier, braver. I didn't just record what had happened. I began documenting what had been taken. Minutes, days, years. I started listing every time someone silenced me. Every time I was told I was too much or not enough. Every time I swallowed my own voice just to keep the peace in a war I never asked for. And in the margins, I wrote how I survived. Did the dishes so I wouldn't get yelled at. Laughed at his joke even though it hurt. Sat through dinner without speaking. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. I needed to know the truth of my life, not the version I had been forced to memorize. One night I drew a line straight down the center of the page. On one side, what they took. On the other, what I was reclaiming. They took my voice, my rest, my softness. I'm reclaiming my time, my boundaries, my right to exist without permission. That list grew. It's still growing. Writing became more than a habit. It was a rebellion, a ritual, a promise to myself that I would never again disappear inside someone else's comfort. And in that quiet corner, with a pen in hand and Gloria's soft humming from the kitchen, I realized something that would change the course of my life. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was remembering how to live. Some people think healing starts with forgiveness, that it's loud and freeing and beautiful, like a sunrise cracking open the sky. But mine started in the quiet. It didn't look like closure. It looked like clean sheets and the smell of something baking. It looked like sunlight slanting through blinds and voices that didn't rise when something went wrong. It looked like Gloria. Every morning she greeted me like I hadn't just crawled out of trauma, but like I belonged in the world. Like I had always belonged. "Morning, baby?" she'd say, flipping pancakes or stirring grits, wearing her house slippers and an old hoodie that read, "Black moms do it better." And I'd nod, still half asleep, and pour myself coffee that someone else had already brewed. It took weeks for my shoulders to stop tensing at every loud sound, to stop scanning the room for the nearest exit, to stop waiting for the second slap that never came. At night, I didn't dream of falling or being chased or screaming into a house where no one heard me. I slept. Actually slept. My body learning slowly what rest felt like. And Tia? She became more than just a friend. She became my mirror. She reminded me what laughter sounded like in my own voice. She dragged me out of bed on Sundays to go walk the neighborhood trail and made me try her homemade smoothies that always tasted like grass and regret. She listened when I talked and sat beside me when I didn't. One night, we lay side by side in her room, staring at the ceiling, music humming low from a speaker. She turned to me and said, "You know what I love most about you?" I shrugged. "You're still soft," she whispered. "After everything. You still care. That's magic, Ray. That's power." I didn't say anything, just let the tears come, because no one had ever told me I was powerful for surviving. They told me I was dramatic, sensitive, difficult, but never strong, never magical. Gloria had a way of showing love that didn't need to be announced. She never pried, but she noticed everything. When I skipped a meal, she made my favorite soup. When I had a bad shift, she handed me tea and sat beside me without a word. She never asked for explanations. She just made room for me. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not fixing everything. Not pretending nothing happened. Just being in a place where you don't have to explain why you flinch or cry or stay quiet when everyone else laughs. One Saturday afternoon, I came home from my shift and found a small gift bag on my pillow. Inside was a pair of new scrubs, soft blue, folded neatly, and a name tag that said, RAELYN, Future Nurse. There was a sticky note taped to the tag, Gloria's handwriting big and bold. "Don't just survive, baby, heal and then go heal others." I sat on the edge of the bed and held the fabric to my chest like it was a medal. That was the day I let myself dream again. Not big, not yet. Just enough to imagine a life where I helped people feel safe, where I listened without judgment, where I held someone's hand when they were too scared to ask for it. A life where I gave the kind of care I had always needed. And in that moment, for the first time, I believed it was possible. I wasn't there yet, but I wasn't where I used to be. And that counted for something. The first time I wore the scrubs Gloria gave me, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror for 10 whole minutes, not to admire myself, not even to check the fit. I was trying to believe it, that this could be me. I turned from side to side, brushed invisible dust from the sleeves, smoothed the fabric over my stomach. And for a moment, I let myself imagine walking down the hallway of a hospital, clipboard in hand, voice steady and sure. I wasn't there yet, but I was showing up. I'd enrolled in an evening nursing assistant program at the local community college. 3 nights a week, 4 hours a class. The room smelled like disinfectant and coffee that had been sitting on a hot plate too long. But it was mine. Most of my classmates were older than me, moms, second chancers, folks rebuilding from something too. There was a quiet understanding in the room. Nobody was here to impress anyone. We were all just trying to make it. I sat in the second row, notebook open, pen ready. I didn't speak much at first. I listened. I watched. I took notes not just on anatomy but on people, how they carried grief in their shoulders, how kindness softened even the loudest voices. And slowly, I began to find my rhythm. Every small task felt like a step towards something. Learning to take blood pressure properly, practicing how to change linens with a patient still in the bed, memorizing infection control protocols. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered, because I had spent most of my life taking care of people who never noticed. Now I was learning to care with purpose, with skill, with dignity. After class, I'd walk home under the streetlights, shoes squeaking slightly, head full of terms like systolic and auscultation. Tia would be waiting up, sitting cross-legged on the couch with 2 mugs of tea and that proud big sister smile she wore better than anyone. "How was it?" she'd ask, and I'd shrug, pretending to be tired. But inside I was glowing. One night, after an especially hard session where we had to role-play with real patients, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. The same spiral-bound notebook, its pages now fuller, messier, more alive. I wrote, "Today I held a woman's hand while she cried. Her name was Miss Lou. She told me I reminded her of her granddaughter. I told her she reminded me of someone too." And then, just below that, "I didn't flinch when she touched me. I didn't shrink." It might sound small, but that line carried weight, because for years even the lightest touch made me brace for pain. I had trained my body to expect harm, even in silence, even in kindness. But that night, I let someone hold my hand, and I didn't feel fear. I felt human. The journal had become more than a place to release. It had become a record of recovery, a daily testimony that I was still here, still moving, still becoming. Sometimes I flipped back through old entries, the ones written in cramped handwriting, lines nearly torn from pressing too hard. The pain in those pages was real. But so was the girl who wrote them. She was still with me, still guiding me. And I promised her every time I opened that notebook that I'd make this life count, not for revenge, not to prove anything to anyone, but because survival wasn't enough anymore. I wanted wholeness. And for the first time, I believed I deserved it. I didn't expect much when I turned in my application to the nursing program at the community college. It felt like tossing a message in a bottle, knowing it might never be found. But I filled it out anyway, printed my transcript, wrote the essay, included a copy of the only letter of recommendation I had, signed by Gloria, typed neatly with her signature in thick blue ink. She ended it with, "This girl doesn't just have potential. She's proof that resilience can grow in the most unkind conditions." I mailed it on a Wednesday afternoon, then went back to folding napkins at the diner like nothing had happened. Weeks passed. I didn't bring it up, didn't tell Tia, didn't even mention it in my journal, not because I was afraid of failing, but because hope still felt fragile, like a glass I wasn't ready to hold. Then one night, Gloria came into the room holding a large envelope. Her eyes sparkled as she handed it to me. "Looks official," she said, smiling. I stared at it like it might disappear if I blinked. Inside was a letter of acceptance, nursing track, fall semester, full tuition assistance based on merit and need. I read it twice before I could breathe. Tia screamed. Gloria cried. I just sat there frozen in the moment, the paper trembling in my hands. I wasn't used to being chosen, not for things that mattered. Later that night, when the house had settled and the celebration faded into warm leftovers and quiet pride, I sat down with my journal and wrote only one sentence. For once, something said yes to me. That summer, I worked double shifts to save for books and uniforms. I studied flashcards on break, highlighted textbooks late into the night, and kept a running list of everything I was learning. But it wasn't just biology or dosage math. I was learning discipline, boundaries, how to hold a patient's pain without taking it home in my chest, how to protect my peace in a world that so easily steals it from women like me, quiet women, invisible women, the kind who used to believe survival was the same as success. My classmates were a mix of second chances and fresh starts. Some had kids, some had scars you could see, some had scars you couldn't. And all of us carried something broken and unfinished, like a secret we kept in our pockets. I made friends slowly, listened more than I spoke. But when I did speak, people listened. One day, our instructor asked for a volunteer to lead a study group for the clinical exam. No one raised their hand. I don't know what came over me, but I did. My voice didn't shake, my chest didn't tighten. I led the review session that Friday, sitting in a circle with 4 other students, guiding them through scenarios, practicing questions, laughing when we got answers wrong, and celebrating when we nailed them. When it was over, one woman tapped me on the shoulder. "You should teach," she said. "You've got a calm way, makes people feel safe." I didn't know what to say, but my smile said enough. That night I wrote in the journal again. Today someone said I made them feel safe. That's what I always needed. Maybe that's what I was meant to become. It hit me then, as I turned off the light and laid my head down on the pillow Gloria had fluffed earlier that morning. I wasn't just building a future. I was becoming the home I never had. My first clinical rotation was in a long-term care facility for the elderly. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't smell like antiseptic and ambition the way hospitals do in TV dramas. It smelled like oatmeal and old books and hand lotion, the kind of place where the hallways echoed slowly and time felt like it moved at half speed. But I loved it from the first day. There was something sacred about the quiet there, something steady. The rhythm of medications, blood pressure checks, sponge baths, soft voices calling out for someone to turn the lights off or help them to the bathroom. I wasn't assigned to any particular patient, but somehow I ended up with Miss Evelyn. She was 87, sharp as glass. Asked me on the first day if I was going to be another girl who doesn't listen and smells like hairspray. I told her I used unscented shampoo. She smirked and let me sit next to her anyway. Miss Evelyn didn't need much. She was mostly independent, but she liked conversation. She liked her tea with honey and her crossword puzzles in pen, and she liked to pretend she was meaner than she really was. But I could see it, the loneliness just under the surface. One afternoon, she told me her husband had died 15 years ago. Cancer, she said flatly. He hated doctors, stubborn fool. She stared out the window for a long time after that, and I didn't say anything. I just handed her the cup of tea and sat quietly beside her. That's something I'd learned. Not from textbooks, but from life. People don't always want advice. They want company. Someone who won't flinch when the silence stretches out too long. Another day, I was helping her put on compression socks. Her hands shook a little and she grew frustrated. I reached out gently and said, "Let me help you." She stopped, looked at me like she was deciding something. "You're not in a rush," she said. "Most of them are always in a rush." I smiled. I used to live in a house where rushing was the only way to stay safe. Now I get to choose my pace. She didn't say anything right away, but she let me help her. After that, she started asking for me specifically. Sometimes she'd call me her girl. Sometimes she'd just say, "Where's the one who doesn't talk too much?" Either way, I showed up, because being there with her reminded me of something I'd buried for years. I knew how to care for people. I always had. But now I got to do it without fear, without it being demanded, without it being the cost of being tolerated. This time care was a choice, mine. And slowly I started to notice the difference. I walked straighter, breathed deeper. I made jokes with the other students. I corrected myself when I made a mistake without spiraling into shame. I started writing in my journal, not just at night, but in the middle of the day. Short sentences, observations. Mrs. Alvarez smiled when I adjusted her pillow. I didn't panic when the IV beeped. I just handled it. Miss Evelyn let me braid her hair today. That last one felt big. I hadn't braided anyone's hair since Mamie. As my hands moved through Evelyn's soft silver strands, I felt something unlock in me, a tenderness I had always tucked away, a gentleness I had been told was weakness. But here, it was welcomed, needed, respected. At the end of that shift, as I gathered my bag and turned in my badge for the day, Miss Evelyn called out from her doorway. "RAELYN," she said. I turned. "You've got healing hands," she said. "Don't let the world harden them." I nodded, trying not to cry, because I knew exactly what she meant. The day I finished my clinicals, I didn't expect anything special. I walked home like usual, my shoes worn thin at the heels, my scrubs a little faded, my journal tucked safely in the bottom of my bag like always. The air was warm, and the late afternoon sun stretched long across the sidewalk. Everything felt soft and slow and exactly the way it should. When I opened the front door, I smelled something baking. Banana bread. Gloria's signature move when something big was about to be said. Tia sat at the kitchen table, grinning like she was holding in a secret. Gloria was fussing with something wrapped in tissue paper. I blinked, confused. "What's going on?" Gloria turned around, holding a small black box with both hands like it was something fragile. "For you," she said. I hesitated. "What is it?" She just pushed it toward me. Inside was an old nurse's watch. The kind you pin to your scrubs, silver chain, oval face, simple design. The glass was a little scratched. It wasn't new, but it was clean and polished and wrapped in care. "This was mine," she said, "when I was your age. I wore it every shift for 12 years, and I knew one day it had belonged to someone who earned it." I couldn't speak. I just held it in my palm, feeling its weight. Not just the metal, but the years, the stories, the quiet hours spent tending to people when no one else would, the exhaustion and the grace, the steady beat of time given to healing. "I've watched you, RAELYN," she said gently. "You didn't just survive. You rebuilt. You showed up. You loved anyway. That's the kind of nurse the world needs." I tried to hold back tears, but they came anyway, because for the first time in my life I felt named, not as a burden, not as a shadow, not as someone who rose above her past, but as someone who had something real to offer. I took the watch upstairs and clipped it onto my clean set of scrubs, the blue ones Tia had ironed for me the night before my final checkoff. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at my reflection, not to admire it, but to accept it. This was who I had become, not a broken girl trying to piece herself together, a woman with a calling. That night I wrote in my journal until my hand cramped. I used to think healing would feel like fireworks, but maybe it's more like this. A watch in a box, A warm loaf of banana bread, a name spoken gently, a legacy passed from one woman's hands to another's. Today, I let the past be behind me, not forgotten but finished. Today, I said yes to the future. Before I went to bed, I slipped the journal into the drawer beside me. For the first time, I didn't need it to hold me together. I didn't need it to remind me who I was, because I already knew. I was a nurse in the making, a woman who had learned how to stay soft in a world that had tried to harden her. A girl who had walked through silence and come out speaking gently, clearly, with purpose. Gloria hugged me goodnight on the way to her room. "You ready?" she asked. I smiled. "More than I've ever been." She nodded, then turned down the hall, her slippers whispering against the wood floor. I climbed into bed and laid still. No ghosts, no weight, no need to armor up, just peace. And in the dark, with the hum of the night all around me, I whispered to the girl I used to be. We made it. It was a Thursday when the call came. I was changing the dressing on a patient's leg, a quiet woman named Ruth who barely spoke above a whisper. We had just finished our small conversation about her grandchildren when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it. I finished wrapping her wound, washed my hands, and helped her back to bed. Then I stepped outside and listened to the voicemail. The words didn't land all at once. Mamie, stroke, passed this morning. The hallway around me went still. No sound, no movement, just a strange, ringing silence like the world had pulled a curtain shut. I didn't cry. I didn't drop to the floor or gasp or call someone for comfort. I just stood there and stared at the exit sign at the end of the corridor, and I remembered the last time I saw her. Her fingers brushing my hair behind my ear. Her voice barely above breath saying, "You are the light, baby. Don't let them keep you in the dark." I had planned to visit her. I'd even written it down in my journal 2 weeks earlier. But I didn't go. I told myself I was too busy, too tired, too focused on school and work and this new life I was building. But the truth was simpler than that. I wasn't ready to see the only person who had loved me purely fading. Now she was gone. When my shift ended, I walked home in the slow light of early evening. I didn't tell Gloria. I didn't say anything to Tia. I just took a long shower, changed into soft clothes, and sat on the edge of my bed with the phone in my hand. There was one more message waiting, from Jaden. His voice cracked. "They're planning the funeral. I thought you should know. You don't have to come. I didn't want you to find out too late." I stared at the wall for a long time after that, and then I stood up and pulled out the black dress I hadn't worn in years, not because I wanted to see them, but because I needed to say goodbye. Not to the past. To her. The only one who ever saw me. The funeral home was small, tucked between an old bakery and a pharmacy with sun-faded posters in the window. I arrived 10 minutes early. There was no dramatic entrance, no slow-motion moment where everyone turned to stare. But they noticed. Gregory looked up from the front pew, his face slackened, not in recognition but in disbelief. Marcia clutched her purse tighter. Jaden shifted in his seat, his eyes not quite meeting mine. I walked past them in silence, wearing a plain black dress, hair pulled back, no jewelry, no makeup, just the calm dignity of a woman who had learned to survive without permission. I sat near the back. I didn't need to be close to the casket. I had already said my goodbye in 100 quiet ways over the years, in every kindness I had given, in every choice to stay soft in a world that wanted me hard. The preacher spoke gently about Mamie's life, her kindness, her wisdom, her faith. I smiled faintly at the mention of her famous lemon pound cake. I could almost taste it. I remembered the way she used to hum while stirring the batter, how she let me lick the spoon when no one was looking, how she never asked for anything in return. That was Mamie. She loved without measuring. When the service ended, people lined up to offer condolences. I waited, let them pass, let them speak their soft words and avoid eye contact with me. Then I stood. I walked to the front, looked at the simple white flowers, at the soft gray fabric of the casket, at the folded hands of the woman who once told me I was the only spark in a house full of shadows. I leaned in slightly and whispered, "You saw me when no one else did. And because of you, I learned how to see myself." Then I walked away. No tears, just peace. Behind me, I could feel them watching, wondering. I didn't owe them anything, not an explanation, not a smile, not forgiveness. But in that moment, I realized something I hadn't known I was waiting to feel. I wasn't angry anymore, not because they deserved grace, but because I no longer carried the weight of their absence. They had no power here, not in my mind, not in my body, not in the quiet, steady life I had built far from the noise of their rejection. As I reached the door, I heard Marcia's voice behind me. "RAELYN." It wasn't soft, it wasn't cruel, just confused, as if she couldn't quite believe the girl she used to control had grown into a woman who didn't flinch. I turned slightly, met her eyes, and said gently but clearly, "You don't get to call me that anymore." Then I stepped out into the sunlight. The air was warm, and I could finally breathe. I didn't go back home after the funeral. Not to check on anyone, not to prove a point, not even out of curiosity. I simply didn't need to. But life has a way of delivering news without you asking. Like little whispers traveling through people who once knew you. I heard that the roof of the old house started leaking the month after Mamie passed. The kitchen sink backed up. The electricity flickered on and off like it couldn't decide whether to stay or leave. Jaden dropped out of his trade program, said it was boring, said he had better things to do. Mostly he stayed up late playing online games, yelling into a headset at strangers, sleeping through the day, drifting through hours like smoke. Gregory lost his job a few months later, something about coming in late, drinking on lunch breaks, saying the wrong thing to the wrong person one too many times. I imagined him sitting in his car, the same one he used to blast the radio in to drown out our crying. Now quiet, empty, fast food wrappers in the back seat, the smell of old sweat and stale beer. Marcia tried to hold it all together. She always was good at pretending. She'd sit at the kitchen table surrounded by unopened bills and half-finished cups of coffee, her jaw tight, her lips thin. Neighbors said she looked older, that she didn't smile much, that she snapped at the mailman and cursed at the dog next door for barking. But none of that surprised me. They had built their lives on control, on volume, on fear, and when there was no one left to silence, the quiet became unbearable. One afternoon I got a package at the clinic. No return address, just my name printed carefully in shaky handwriting. Inside the box was a bundle of old things. A faded apron, scorched slightly at the edges. A spiral-bound recipe book with flour smudges on the corners, and a single sheet of paper, blank. No note, no explanation, but I understood it instantly. That apron had been mine when I was a child, forced into chores while Jaden ran wild outside. The recipe book was Mamie's, torn from years of use. Her handwriting was still there on the inside cover. And that blank page? That was the part that hit the hardest. Because nothing needed to be written. It was the loudest silence I had ever received. I placed the items gently back into the box and slid it under my bed. Not out of nostalgia, but because they no longer held power over me. They were no longer wounds, just artifacts. Proof that I had been there, that I had lived through it, and left. Some people want revenge to look like fire. I wanted mine to look like absence, like the echo of a name no one dares to say, like a room that stays empty, like a woman they never expected to live well without them. And yet, here I was, living. A month later, I mailed a package. No return address, just the old family home written in block letters on the front. Inside, I placed 3 things. The apron, folded neatly, the burn mark still visible like a scar that never fully fades. Mamie's worn recipe book, pages dog-eared, the corner of one still holding a faint smear of strawberry jam from a summer morning I never forgot, and a blank sheet of paper. No ink, no explanation. I didn't write because there was nothing left to say. I sealed the box, brought it to the post office, and handed it over with a calmness I didn't know I had. The woman behind the counter smiled. "Anything fragile?" "No," I said. "Nothing that can break." It wasn't meant to provoke. It wasn't meant to wound. It was a door closing without a sound, a mirror turned face down, a quiet declaration that I had nothing more to carry, and nothing left to give. That night I sat on the porch with a mug of tea and watched the streetlights come on one by one. Tia came out and joined me, her silence as comforting as her presence. After a while she asked, "Was that for them, or for you?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Maybe both. But mostly, it was for the girl I used to be. She deserved to know that she didn't disappear. She walked away." We didn't speak after that. just sat in the evening stillness while the wind moved through the trees like an old song no one remembered the words to. In my room, later that night, I took the journal out one last time. I turned to the back page. It was the only one I had left. I stared at it for a long time, then slowly tore it from the spine and carried it to the window. The wind outside was steady. I opened the glass, held the page for a moment between my fingers and let it go. It danced for a second, caught the air, and floated into the darkness like a feather that finally understood it didn't need to fall. No words, just release. Because sometimes the loudest forgiveness isn't a speech. It's a silence no one can interrupt. Some mornings, I wake before the alarm. The sky outside still a soft gray, birds just beginning to stir. And for a few seconds, I lie still and listen to the silence. Not the heavy kind I used to live in, not the silence of fear or walking on eggshells or waiting for footsteps down the hallway. This is a different kind of quiet, the kind that holds peace in its hands. I rise slowly, stretch, and walk barefoot into the kitchen. The tile is cool, the light just beginning to pour through the window above the sink. The kettle whistles softly. I make tea. Same way every day. Chamomile with a touch of honey. Gloria taught me that rhythm. Start the morning by choosing something kind, she always said. And I do. It's been a little over a year since I finished school. Now I work full-time at a residential care facility just outside the city. It's not the highest-paying job. It's not glamorous, but I love it. There's a small garden in the back where I sometimes sit with patients who are able to go outside. I bring them tea, wrap them in blankets. We watch the squirrels dig and chase each other through the hedges. We listen to the wind moving through the trees. One woman, Miss Geraldine, calls me Sunshine in Scrubs. Another patient, Mr. Halverson, never remembers my name. But every time I walk into the room, he smiles like he's known me forever. That's what matters to me. Not titles, not praise, not some polished version of success. Just showing up for people who need someone to see them, to hear them, to be with them in their fragility and still offer dignity. Every night before I leave, I do one last round. I check their vitals. I smooth their sheets. I ask if they want the door cracked or closed, if they'd like music or silence. Then I whisper the same thing in every room, whether they're awake or already sleeping. You're safe. You matter. I'll be back tomorrow. Because sometimes people don't need miracles. They just need consistency. Back at home, I share dinner with Tia and Gloria most nights. We sit around the kitchen table, pass the vegetables, argue about who's washing up, and laugh about things that don't matter. But I've learned the little things are where life actually lives. Last week, Tia brought home a man she's been seeing. His name is Nolan. He's quiet, thoughtful, watches people more than he talks. He asked me once how I ended up in nursing. I looked at him for a long second and said, because nobody ever stayed when I needed care, and now I get to be who I once prayed would walk through the door. He nodded like he understood. And I think he did. It's not a fairy tale. I don't wake up glowing with gratitude every morning. There are hard days. Days when patients pass, when paperwork piles up, when memories sneak in uninvited. But those days don't define me anymore. They just remind me how far I've come. I keep the nurse's watch Gloria gave me clipped to my uniform. It's a little worn now. The chain catches slightly. The glass has new scratches, but it still ticks, still counts the moments that matter. And every once in a while, I catch myself smiling at nothing. Not because I've forgotten the past, but because it no longer owns me. I live in a world I built with my own hands, one that smells like lavender lotion and fresh bread, one where no one raises their voice, one where I get to lay my head down at night and sleep all the way through without waking in fear. That to me is freedom, not a dramatic escape, not revenge that makes the headlines, but peace, deep, earned, real. Dinner at Gloria's is never fancy. It's always something like roasted chicken, green beans with too much garlic, and mashed potatoes that still have a few lumps. But it's real, and it's warm, and nobody's keeping score. We pass dishes without tension. We talk over each other sometimes, and when someone forgets to put the salad out, we just laugh and say we'll eat it tomorrow. It's simple. But for someone who grew up believing that silence was safer than speaking, sitting at this table is revolutionary. Tonight, Tia lit candles, not for anything special. She just said it made the food taste better. Nolan helped Gloria slice the bread. I set the table, humming a little without realizing it. When we sat down, Gloria said grace like she always does. Short, honest, nothing scripted. Thank you for the hands that made this meal and the hearts that share it. Amen. That was it. We passed the chicken. Tia talked about a coworker who wore 2 different shoes to work. Nolan chuckled softly and asked if it was a fashion statement. Gloria said she once went to church in slippers and didn't realize until communion. I watched them while they laughed. Not from the outside. Not as someone trying to belong, but as someone who did. Later, as the table cleared and the dishes clinked in the sink, I found myself standing next to Nolan, drying a plate. He looked at me for a second, then asked gently, "Do you miss them?" He didn't have to say who. I dried the plate, set it down carefully. "Sometimes," I said, "but I think I miss the version of them I wanted them to be, not who they actually were." He nodded. "It's okay to miss even the people who hurt you," he said. "It just means your heart stayed soft." I didn't reply, but I let that truth settle in me. Because maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting, not pretending it never happened, but standing in the kitchen next to someone who sees you and choosing to stay soft anyway. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stayed up. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of the old floorboards and the low hum of the refrigerator. I opened the drawer beside my bed and took out the journal. It was worn now. The edges curled, the cover faded. Some of the pages were soft with use, corners folded, margins scribbled with thoughts I didn't have the courage to say out loud at the time. This journal had carried me, through fear, through silence, through hunger, grief, rage, and all the ways I had tried to survive in a world that kept pushing me down. It had been my companion when I had no one, my witness when no one saw me, my anchor when everything else spun out. I turned to the final page. It was blank. I held a pen in my hand, hovering for a moment. But I didn't write. There was nothing left to process, no words left to reclaim. Because healing doesn't always need narration. Sometimes it just needs space. I stood up, walked to the window, opened it slowly. The night air was cool, gentle. A quiet breeze slipped through, lifting the curtain like a breath. I held the last page between my fingers. One page, white, free. And I let it go. It floated for a second, then twirled in the air like a ribbon before drifting into the dark. I watched it until I couldn't see it anymore, and still, I stood there. I wasn't waiting for anything, not for closure, not for applause, not even for forgiveness, because I'd finally understood something. I didn't need permission to move on. I didn't need anyone's blessing to exist fully. My worth wasn't tied to the family that failed to hold me. It was in the woman I had become. The one who stayed kind. The one who stayed. The girl who once cried herself to sleep had grown into someone who could make a patient smile through their pain, who could laugh at dinner, who could choose what love should feel like. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. Not because I'd won, but because I no longer needed to. Mornings come gently now, no jarring alarms, no slammed doors or sharp voices cutting through sleep, just the slow light easing in through the curtains, the soft hum of life waking up outside. I move through the morning without rush, tea first, then the sound of water filling the sink, the smell of toast, Gloria humming somewhere in the background, Tia calling out that she forgot her keys again, Nolan reading the paper with glasses sliding down his nose. It's not perfect, but it's mine. Some days I still catch myself tensing at sudden noises. I still wake from dreams I can't always remember but leave a heaviness in my chest. But I breathe through it. I place my hand over my heart. I say to myself, "You're not there anymore." And that's enough. Work at the clinic has become a rhythm I love. There's something healing in the small, repetitive acts. Changing linens, filling water pitchers, holding someone's hand when they're scared, listening to a story they've told 3 times already like it's the first. One patient told me the other day, "You make people feel like they matter, even when they're falling apart." I smiled, because that's the only kind of legacy I want to leave. After work, I walk. Not to go anywhere, really. Just to feel the ground under my feet. To remind myself I have the right to take up space. I pass by children playing, couples arguing, old men smoking on porches. Ordinary life, and I belong to it now. Not as someone broken, not as someone surviving, but as someone living. There's a difference, a big one. And the girl I used to be, the one who whispered apologies for simply existing, she's still here. But she walks beside me now, not behind, not hiding, not begging, just quiet, present, free. Her name was Elsie. 84. Tiny. Fiercely independent even as her body failed her. She didn't like to be fussed over. Didn't want sympathy or soft voices. She called everyone kid and insisted on eating toast without crust, even though it hurt her teeth. But for some reason, she let me in. Maybe it was the way I listened. Or the way I didn't fill the silence with empty reassurances. We'd sit in her room in the late afternoons, the sun casting a warm gold across the walls. She'd talk about her husband, gone 20 years now, and the garden they once had with tulips that bloomed all at once, like they were racing each other. One evening, she was quieter than usual. I helped her into bed, pulled the blanket up gently. Her breathing was slow, shallow. I could tell she was tired, but not just in her bones, in her soul. She reached for my hand and held it tighter than usual. "Don't be afraid when it comes," she said, her voice like paper. "It's not a thief, it's just a door." I didn't speak, just nodded. Then she whispered, "It's good to have someone sitting with you when the door opens." That night she passed. No machines, no chaos, just peace. I sat with her until the nurse came, brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, tucked the blanket a little tighter around her. And I cried. Not because I was broken, but because I had witnessed something sacred. The end of one story, and the quiet courage it takes to close a chapter with grace. Later, as I walked home, the wind picked up. The sky was clear, stars steady above me, and I thought about all the doors I'd walked through, some slammed, some creaked open, some I never wanted to face. But I had walked through them anyway, and I was still here, not untouched, but unafraid, because now I knew I could be the one sitting beside someone when their door opened, and I could also be the one stepping through my own, without fear. There's a window at the end of the hallway at work. It faces west. Every evening the sunlight spills through it like a quiet blessing. Sometimes I stop there before heading home, just for a minute. I look out at the sky changing color. I think about all the versions of myself I've been. The little girl who tried so hard to earn love, the teenager who stopped speaking just to avoid being noticed, the young woman who walked away with nothing but a bag and a broken spirit. And now, this woman, still healing, still learning, but standing tall. I used to think value came from being needed, from being chosen, from someone else saying, "You matter." But now, I know the truth. Value isn't given. It's claimed. You don't need someone's permission to be whole. You don't need an apology to begin again. You don't need to keep proving your worth to people who refuse to see it. You just have to decide, I'm enough, as I am, even if no one claps. I smile at my reflection in the window, and I whisper, I'm proud of you. Not because I arrived, but because I kept going. If you're listening to this right now, and you've ever felt invisible, or unwanted, or unloved, please hear this. You are not the pain they gave you. You are not the silence you were forced into. You are not too much or not enough. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to start again. You are allowed to heal, loudly or quietly, in your own way. And if no one told you lately, you matter. You're not alone. And it's never too late to choose peace. If this story touched something in you, share it. Comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. And if you're ready to stand tall again, just like RAELYN, subscribe to this channel for more real stories of silent strength and quiet revolutions. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is live like you've already won, and maybe, just maybe, you already have.